we lived through so many unprecedented events that it's like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to have a baby during a pandemic. When else would I have? Like, of course.
Yeah.
It's like I was in high school during 9/11, graduated college at the peak of the recession. It's like, yeah, let's just have a baby during the worst possible time.
Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to Worthy Mother Podcast. May is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month, and I want to make sure we're having some good conversations bringing awareness to mental health in motherhood. We totally deserve to be talking about our mental health, and also we deserve to understand the way our mental health as mothers exists in the context of the world that we're currently living in and mothering in. That's a huge factor to how we're going to be doing in our well-being just in general, in particular thinking about our mental health. Today we are going to be talking to Allie McQuaid, a therapist certified in perinatal mental health who has been helping moms navigate the challenges of motherhood for over 5 years. And the plan for this episode is to dig into all things mental health for millennial moms. So, Allie, welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I am so happy you are here. I am so happy we're able to record. I know you've had like just a kind of wild last hour.
Yeah, not even
but I'm
an
so
hour.
happy you're here.
Like this happened literally 10 minutes before we were supposed to sign on. And I'm like, what is the universe trying to tell me right now? No, but that's what moms do. We adapt, we roll with it, we just keep going. But no, thank you so much for having me on. For those who aren't understanding our context here, I think a transformer just blew where I am. And so now I have no power, but it's all good. We're still able to do this.
Yeah, and if you're watching on YouTube, the lighting's great. She has a window in front of her and the phone service is working and we're able to record. Everything sounds good. So we're going to roll with it.
Yes, let's do it.
So can you just go ahead and tell us about yourself and the incredible work that you're doing as a therapist supporting moms?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I'm in Maryland. I'm originally from the DC area, but moved up to Maryland. I traded my, I guess, like my city life for a more rural suburban life, which now I'm like questioning everything. I'm like, now the transformers are blowing up. I'm like, what did I do? No, but so we moved up to Maryland. I have this shed style like office space that we have on our property that I get to welcome clients to. And I also, of course, see clients virtually. But yeah, I just feel like so fortunate to have this setup where I can essentially like work from home, but not be inside my home because, navigating the pandemic, which I'm sure so many of us struggled with the balancing of life and work. We also had a baby in 2020. So there was just so much going on that my husband one day was like, what if we just built like a shed and you could just have, I'm like, that seems weird, but tell me more, So he had this great idea and now I get to welcome moms and I help them navigate, all parts of motherhood. And I just feel so fortunate to be able to do this work.
I love that like idea of you having a shed that you work from home but not quite from home. Like how relevant it is to this conversation when we are talking about like modern mothers and the things that we are dealing with that contribute to our mental health. And I think that's a big one is like the fact that a lot of us are working from home, or if we're not, there's that opportunity that exists and the like boundary crossing and just like navigating all the things all together all the time, and just like how cool that you have found a solution to that and have like a really sick setup where you get to like walk out the door and leave for work, but also like you can go back into the house for lunch.
That's exactly it. Like, do you have a camera here? Like, this is exactly what I
Yes.
do. And yeah, I get to let my dog out. I mean, thankfully, our daughter's at the age where she goes to pre-K. So it's like she has her thing. But even if, we were still having her be home, for childcare situations, it was like I could go in and, say hi to her and then come back out. And initially it was a little challenging, like you said, with the boundaries where it's like, she thinks she can come out here sometimes. And so it's like being able to like, kind of communicate, no, mommy's working out here. Like you can't, come out. But yeah, all in all, it's a great setup. I feel incredibly lucky.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to really quickly just acknowledge your Instagram presence. You are at Millennial Mom Therapist on Instagram. And I think like just everything you do there represents that so wonderfully, right? And I know that I was drawn to you with the way that you post content for millennial moms. And I'm sure a lot of people come to your space drawn to that too. You post a lot of like educational things, but also relatable memes and just different things. And it's like, oh, yeah, that I can relate to that. And I'm curious, just from like having that platform and also then working with moms in like a therapy relationship, how you would describe the state of mental health for millennial moms.
Yeah, yeah, that's a loaded question because I
Yeah.
think, yeah, there's so much that's going on. I mean, I think, and I appreciate the kind words that you said about my Instagram page. It's been such a creative outlet for me for like 5 to 6 years ish. I started originally as a therapist, really wanting to support anxious kids and their families. And, being a anxious kid myself growing up as a millennial, there was so many unprecedented events that we lived through that I think, makes sense why we maybe so many of us are dealing with anxiety. And then when you enter into motherhood, especially if you haven't found actual tangible ways of regulating yourself, like actually really knowing what it means to emotionally regulate. I didn't learn that until I was a mom. And I had internships. I went to grad school. Like I'm a therapist. I was helping anxious kids and their families. I thought, I got this. I can do this. And I think that's what so many moms enter into motherhood thinking like, oh, I'll just read all the books and I'll prepare and I'll prep. And I think it's this idea of being a perfect parent. I think the ways are shifting a little bit where moms are letting go of that drive for perfectionism. But I think, at least what I'm seeing with a lot of my clients, I think what draws people to my page is I'm giving people permission to just be enough, like that you don't have to be a perfect parent. And this whole idea of intensive parenting, or let's be real, like intensive mothering, like moms are doing so much right now that you don't have to do it all. And the reality is, it's impossible to do it all. So, I think that's like a just an umbrella of what we're seeing. And then obviously there's a lot of like subtopics that are under that. Is this whole idea that we need to be like doing it all for everybody. We need to have a career. We need to stay at home, but also like, be present and soak up every moment and make the homemade bread and do all the crafts. And it's like, but then when do we find time for hobbies? There's so many things that we feel like we need to be doing that it then leaves us, I think, feeling paralyzed by all the decisions and all the things.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I'm sure anybody listening can relate because we're all in it, right? We're all mothering in this world and we're all up against those same
Mhm.
expectations and feeling like we should expect that of ourselves. And I think that's interesting saying like you didn't learn to emotionally regulate until you were a mom, which I know is something that I could say hands down is true for me and true for probably again most
Mhm.
moms. But it is interesting coming from the perspective of like you have the training, like the technical training on how to do this. But in what other situation are you put in positions where you're emotional, like where you are dysregulated so
Mhm.
much and have to get back to that point of regulation? And if you don't practice that, why would you know how to do that? Like you might know how you're supposed to, but like that in itself is so much pressure of like we should be able to do these things. We should have the tools, we should have the skills. I've never dealt with these issues before. And now all of a sudden I have a kid. I thought I was prepared for this and no.
No, no, I'm not prepared. Yeah, and I think that's so much of what's so hard in navigating the motherhood journey is that you could hear it, from other people, you could read all the books, you could even follow all the right Instagram pages, but you still may feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and that can be a real identity, shock for a lot of moms, especially ones who have been high achieving, did well in school, got a good job, or were valued in friendships or family dynamics, and then now you're the one that is like feeling all this pressure to raise this child. And I think for so many of us, we also want to get it right, like we don't want to screw up our kids. And I think so many of us are also breaking generational patterns of how we were raised, and that's such a big core of, I think, the millennial parenting experience is
Yeah.
kind of paving the way for a different way of parenting. And I know there's a lot of information out there about gentle parenting, or like what's the right way of parenting. And there's all these different names and labels. And I think that's another thing that confuses parents is like there's so many buzzwords floating around. It's like someone just tell me what do I do? Just tell me what do I do in this scenario? Because yeah, our parents for a variety of reasons that wasn't their reality. So, now we're up
Yeah.
against, all these challenges, but we're also doing so much good too.
Yeah, I want to actually like dig into that a little bit
Yeah.
more of like what the factors are specifically thinking about millennial moms. Like, what are the factors contributing to mental health issues for millennial moms? Because I think, like you said, anxiety is a big one. And there are like additional expectations on millennial moms, like the breaking the cycles and yeah, all the parenting information that's out there. Like, there's so many different things piling on us. So I just want to like talk really explicitly about that and what you're seeing.
Yeah. So I think you just named a few there, which is great. So the parenting expectations. So feeling like we need to parent our kids in a way that's going to be, I guess, socially acceptable, either within our
Mm-hmm.
peer groups, within the school setting, and also, kind of within other generations, our parents, other generations in our family dynamics, that there's that component too, because I think a lot of us have family members that are caring for our children as well. So that's also like another big component because childcare, the childcare crisis. So I think that's just goes into the next one. We don't have paid parental leave. We don't have childcare support in our country. So we're feeling torn between, do I go back to work? Do I try to do a part-time situation? For so long, I think it's finally changing. Moms were working at home, or I guess sometimes both parents, and also caring for their children, which is just literally impossible, I think, for so many people, unless you have really, really flexible work hours or tasks. There's the challenges with, mental health, like you said. So anxiety, depression, any of, kind of the PMADs, so perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. I know you'll be playing this during maternal mental health month, so I think it's important to make note of the different PMADs. So there's bipolar, there's depression, anxiety, OCD, psychosis, and they're all kind of within the mood disorders and anxiety disorders that can show up in motherhood. And I don't think those are talked about enough. I think the stigma is reducing, but the care and accessibility to care is not increasing at the same time. So yeah, there's the 6-week checkup, but it's like
Yeah.
there needs to be more hands and eyes on moms.
Yeah, that is interesting to think about how conversations are shifting so much. And they really are. I know obviously like from my perspective and your perspective, like we're in the
Mhm.
conversations, right? Like we're seeing the conversations and I don't know, I couldn't tell you for a mom who isn't like actively partaking or actively looking for conversations on mental health if they are coming across that, right? But I do think just in general we can see that majorly shifting in society and in large part because of social media.
Mhm.
I would say like the people are talking,
Yeah.
people are sharing things in a way that has never happened before and has never been able to happen before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like access to care or even like just that next step of education of like, okay, we may know that we're having these conversations, but like, now what? What do I do with
Mhm.
that? May not have caught up. And that's an interesting like way to think about that. And there's been progress, but
Yeah.
there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, because I think as a whole, moms don't have the capacity to maybe put into action a lot of like they consume the information. We're in the age of over
Mm-hmm.
information. I think just as the millennial experience, like we know what life was like before the internet and after the internet, and we really grew up with it. So,
Mm-hmm.
like Gen Z and obviously all the future generations, like they've known it in their whole lives and they know what it's like to easily search something on Google, or apparently Google is like too old now. Now they just go right to AI, So it's like,
Yeah.
they grow up with it and it's come so naturally. And I think for us, yes, it is a part of, what we're used to and what we're accustomed to. And at the same time, we're flooded with information. And then what do we do with it? And then that's when the freeze response becomes activated. Like I freeze with decision making. I don't know what to do, or I don't know what's the best choice. And then you doubt yourself. So, it kind of
Yeah.
leads into the domino effect of just feeling totally, not good enough as a mom, which is, what I hear all the time, which is truly upsetting. And at the same time, I'm like, yes, please be vulnerable with me so I can help you, work through this.
Yeah, instead of like if the thoughts are there, instead of keeping them all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. More people
Yeah.
are
And
talking
that,
about this, which is so important.
yeah, it is so, so important. And I have a lot of gratitude for being a mother in this time
Hmm.
while also recognizing the challenges of it. Something that I know you've been talking about is pandemic parenting. And I know we're like on the other side of that. It's wild. It's 2025. We just had like the 5-year anniversary of the shutdown. Like, what is life? But I think that, like, even coming face to face with the fact that it's been 5 years is in itself just this like wild, where's time gone? In a different way, I think, than just the normal situation of like time flies. And I'm curious what like role the pandemic, because a lot of millennial moms were either raising school age children through the pandemic or having babies. I know my second son was born in 2021. Like, what's been the impact?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, just like there was like pre-pandemic life and post, like it's kind of like the internet. Like before the internet, we remember life, and after the, so it's like pre-pandemic, we remember what life was like, and then post-pandemic, like it feels like everything changed and everything just became so much. There was a lot of distrust in terms of like, feeling not only like with the information that we were getting, but also like, what people, or just feeling so isolated and just feeling so anxious. Like any little thing that I did, could that, be harmful to my baby or me? Or, there's just so much that I think was contributing to the overthinking and the overwhelm that came from the pandemic. I mean, I feel like overwhelm is just like the biggest word that comes to mind when I think of
Yeah.
the pandemic. Yeah, hearing that you had your second in 2021, there was that own unique cohort of, navigating pregnancy and postpartum during 2021, because I know 2020 was its own experience because everything was brand new and no one knew anything.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2021, people knew a little bit more. There was, talk about the vaccines coming out. So there was maybe like a little sense of hope or sense we're coming out of it. But then more people were getting like little lax with social distance, So it's like there was, and then there were the peaks and the valleys of the surges and the news and the number of people dying. I mean, that's like really hard to hear. And I think we minimize how hard it is to hear every day about news reports about, just a deadly virus or people dying or worldwide, chaos. Like that's something that as a mom, I feel like we carry with us because we think about this is the world we brought our kids into, and now we're raising them in this scary place. It's just a lot to hold on to.
As you're saying that, I felt myself like tearing up, and I don't know, I was not expecting that. Like, but it really, I don't know that I've thought back on that experience. My son was born in February 2021, like as vaccines were rolling out, and just like being part of Facebook groups that were discussing the impacts of vaccines on breastfeeding moms and like all of that, and just the weight that we were all carrying with making decisions like, oh, like I could just cry right now thinking about it. And I don't know that I've ever reflected on just how intense that was.
Yeah.
It was really intense. The decision overwhelmed. Like, I mean, I remember in the moment feeling like there was decision overwhelmed, but like really looking back and being like, we did that. Like, we all just made it through in such a scary time. And yeah, there's something about 2021 where it's like I decided to get pregnant in 2020, knowing that, and the responsibility of knowing that, like it is heavy, and like, yeah.
Yeah. No,
I
I
asked the question. I didn't really realize it was going to like hit so hard.
Yeah, yeah. And you are totally not alone with this. Like it almost feels like it hits you in the face with, I mean,
Hmm.
it's grief. It's a form of grief in the sense that you didn't get to have the pregnancy and postpartum experience with your second the same as your first, and that is really upsetting. And no matter what, if you knew, like, it doesn't matter if you knew what world you were, getting pregnant in, that it's still like something that I think, yeah, we all hold on to and carry as this like loss of just a time when we should have been supported. We should have been able to be excited about our pregnancies. We should have been able to feel like we weren't making this big life-changing decision whether or not to get a vaccine or not. I mean, I'm sure we'll be flagged with like the vaccine stuff, but it's like I honestly I want everyone to feel like they are safe to choose whatever decision that they choose with that. There's so many nuances with that, and I totally get it. And at the same time, this was something that we were all just learning at the same time. So we were all being faced with this information at the same time. And I think, yeah, we discount how much that was, how much of, that was to carry and to navigate through. That was so hard.
Yeah. And no matter what stage of life, whether you were having babies at that time or just, the transition, your kid going from elementary school to middle school and missing their sixth grade
Oh.
thing or whatever, like there's so many things that we missed out on, everyone. And the grief that comes with that, it's like, of course it has an impact.
Mhm.
Of course it does. And it probably impacted our children. And like,
Mhm.
we're still dealing with that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, like you said, we just found a way to get through it. And I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, it's pretty remarkable when you look back to that time and think like, wow, we got through that. And I think when we think about just the millennial experience as a whole, you know, one of the biggest words that comes up, whether, in a humorous way or a non-ironic way, is like unprecedented. Like we lived through so many unprecedented events that it's like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to have a baby during a pandemic. When else would I have? Like, of course.
Yeah.
It's like I was in high school during 9/11, graduated college at the peak of the recession. It's like, yeah, let's just have a baby during the worst possible time. So it's like, yeah, it's kind of tongue in cheek, a joke, but at the same time it's like, yeah, a lot of our lives was navigating through really hard times that no one really sat down and said like, that's really, like, traumatic that you watched, trigger warning, 9/11, that you watched a plane, run into, major landmark towers in one of the biggest cities in the United States. Like, we didn't have really time to process that,
No.
So I think, yeah, same thing in the pandemic, we were expected just to keep on moving, just be grateful you have a baby, I mean, whatever
Yeah.
platitudes people said, it's like, yeah, no, it makes sense why there's emotions still coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's heavy. It's heavy stuff. It is really heavy stuff. Thinking about our generation versus generations past, maybe our parents, Gen X, boomers, and then even maybe looking forward because Gen Z, like they're having kids, right? It's
It's weird.
us millennials are getting older.
Oh.
Just what the differences maybe you see are. I mean, how has it been different for us than it has been for past generations? And how do you think that's continuing to change?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because, I think it's different in a lot of ways for each generation. I know Gen X tends to be the forgotten generation, and I apologize because I feel like I don't know a lot about that generation. When we think about like the differences between that and millennials, I often harp on boomers, because I think a lot of us have boomer parents, and there's the kind of the stereotypical boomer that we think of that is like, I wasn't allowed to have feelings, and oh, you slept through the night at 2 weeks old or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to look at their experience and think like, wow, they really weren't allowed, to exist in the space that we are in terms of being able to express our emotions, being allowed to talk about mental health. That wasn't a thing at all, when they were growing up in the 50s and 60s, thinking about, the wars that they also lived through. We lived through some hard times, they lived some. So I think there are some similarities in that way. Some of the differences, like we touched on before, big time social media and the internet in terms of millennials feeling like we're constantly consuming media and information, and that can almost make things feel worse and harder in a lot of ways because we're just like constantly bringing it into our brains, and feel like our brains aren't designed to be consuming all of that. And same with Gen Z, and I feel like we're seeing a big dip with Gen Z with birth rates. I feel like they're not
Mm-hmm.
kids as much as previous generations, and probably for a lot of valid reasons. It's really hard to raise a kid, in this climate. And I think in a lot of ways, they're also maybe delaying either starting a family or choosing not to get married or having like kind of non traditional, family styles or, kind of family environments. And yeah, I think we're just seeing kind of each unique experience unfold, right before us. So it's kind of fascinating.
It definitely is. Thinking about social media and the internet, and you kind of spoke to this, but where do you stand on like if this is a good thing or a not so good thing?
Yeah, it was funny. I was thinking about this the other day. I think, I had a conversation with a friend a while back about like social media, because I told her, I'm like, I don't think I would ever be off of it because so much of my business is on social media in terms of like marketing my business, but also like, I guess my brand or, my content, that sort of thing. But I also, you know, I love Facebook Marketplace, like, so there's a lot of, like, good that comes out of it in some ways, but I think overall, it probably is, like, a net positive, like, if you weigh all the, like, pros and cons, but only if you are able to curate your feed and your algorithm to work for you versus against you. So, I found myself in a not so good place mentally and on my social media. So I think there's a clear causal relationship there, where I was finding myself, going to it to find answers, going to it to like someone telling me what to do. I need an expert for sleep. I need an expert for feeding. I need an expert for toddler behavior. Like I went to it for everything. And I was then the algorithm shifted to see like, oh, she has a, you know, 15-month-old. So this is what she's dealing with. And then I felt like I was fed more ads. I was fed more, buy this course, download this PDF, like all these things. And so at the time, I feel like this is great. I can just pick up my phone, click one thing, and I can be fed all this information. And this is great. But it put me in a place of doubting myself, being overly anxious, overthinking, feeling like I couldn't say the right thing unless I had the script screenshotted on my phone and having it available. And again, like we talked about before, like I'm a therapist. At that point, I had been a therapist for like, I don't know, like 7 years. And I worked with kids, and I felt like I knew what I was doing. But then when it's your own kid, it's so different. It's so, so different because there's so much that comes with that you're dealing with on the back end with the mental load and remembering like all the household tasks and deciding like how long I want to breastfeed for and when do I go back to work, so it's not as simple as like, oh, I work with kids, so that means I can be a parent. It's like there isn't that clear kind of like next step that makes it easy. But back to your question. Sorry, I go off on tangents. But back to your question.
No,
Yeah,
I
I
love
think
it.
social media can be positive if you make it work for you. So if you
Yeah.
mark things that you're not interested in, curate your feed to have like very authentic, approachable, relatable content, monitor how much you're getting fed like ads and like things that people are trying to sell like the links and all that. Like if you're feeling like that's overwhelming, then it's okay to unfollow or mute somebody if that feels like too much.
It is such an interesting kind of questioning of like I think a lot of these conversations about mental health and the education around it, like the access to actually quality
Mm.
information has become like it's so much more accessible with social media, and I think that's such a great thing, but there's the other side of like the overload of information, even quality information
Mhm.
that can be actually not that helpful. I'm curious, like I've heard you talk a little bit about like parenting styles and the way that I mean gentle parenting, respectful parenting, there's a lot of names for like these types of styles that I feel like, and maybe not so much right now, but like a year or two ago, it was like in your face, this is how you have to be parenting to be doing a good job as a millennial and breaking the cycles and all these
Mhm.
things. And like, I think a lot of the advice is really good advice. And if you can follow it, like amazing, but also like probably can't implement it all well because, reading something on Instagram and being able to emotionally regulate are two different things.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yes, I think you just hit on two really important points there. So the first thing is that yes, we were inundated with so much gentle parenting, like conscious, respectful parenting, and I actually love all of those approaches. And I think there's ways to weave in all of them. There, you don't have to follow like one by the book necessarily. I think more of it is just understanding that kids can have emotions. You validate those emotions, You're allowed to have boundaries. You're allowed to be firm with those boundaries. You don't have to be like, oh, honey, oh, I said, we can't do that, like, and I think that's where things got misconstrued. Like people saw the word gentle and then they automatically think like permissive, or they think that, oh, you're so gentle, you're just letting your kids be soft. That was like a lot of boomer content, that I would put out, and they're like, oh, you kids are so soft, that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I think that was the first thing. We got a lot of this information. A lot of it is good. I will say a lot of it is pulled from stuff that's already in books that you can get in the library for free, but it was just repackaged into courses, which I mean, I think courses have their place. I get why they're maybe more accessible than someone picking up a book. I know I wasn't reading books when I was, 1 year postpartum, or even now it's hard, so I get that. And at the same time, I think there's this idea that, all right, I followed this script or I follow this course, and then this outcome will happen. My kid, the tantrum will stop. They will not be a picky eater anymore. They will go to bed easily, whatever the situation is. And I think that's where things get tricky and we get in the weeds with that, because then we think like, well, what am I doing wrong? I followed it perfectly, but my kid still was screaming their head off, So that's where I think understanding that these things aren't one size fits all. And I think that's something that the people who, I think for better or worse, do a really good job of marketing this. They make you feel like this is going to solve all your problems, or, you don't
Mhm.
have to be afraid of screwing up your kid because we have the magical solution that's going to break the generational cycles and things like that. And who wouldn't want that? That's eating at the pain point that I think so many of us millennials feel, is that we want to do it right. And it's so great when someone lays it all out there for us. Like, who wouldn't want that? It's like a study guide and it has all the answers, who wouldn't want that? But I think we're now realizing that our kids are not robots. We are not robots. Like, we are human and we are allowed to be authentic. We are allowed to be messy and make mistakes. And that's where, the art of repair, being able to emotionally regulate and know how to truly meet our needs, and then be able to co-regulate with our kids, and see what that looks like for our unique kid, not the one that shows up on the Instagram feed, like our kid that's sitting right in front of us.
Yeah, it's making me think about how so many millennials identify as perfectionists or recovered perfectionists or whatever, right? And there's so much to why that is, but just the way that a lot of that parenting advice has been shared with us, it feels like if you did it perfectly, you would get that result. But how that kind of is, in a way, you're expecting your kid then to be perfect by doing this, and
Mhm.
how really what cycle are you breaking? Sounds to me like continuing a cycle of like I expect my child to be perfect, and that's just not like how it is. And
Mhm.
would you say, like, do you get the feeling, because I feel like for me and what shows up on my feed, we are moving away from that. Would you agree?
I agree. And I mean, in 2022, I had a whole like moment where I did like a whole overhaul of my Instagram, where I like unfollowed a bunch of pages, like especially like pages that were geared towards the specific problem that we were having with our daughter. So say like sleep regressions. I was following a whole bunch of sleep accounts. And it's ironic. You would think like, well, why wouldn't you want to keep following them if that's what you're struggling with as a mom? I'm like, no, 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 no. This is making me feel even worse because, it's making me feel like I have to do XYZ or whatever. And instead I need to just like see what's going on in our household, like our,
Mm-hmm.
little nuances that we're doing with our schedule, with whatever our daughter needs, blah, blah, blah. I do feel like it is better because I personally make sure like whatever I'm watching or whatever I engage with is something that connects with my values as a parent, and, makes me feel better. Like it seems so simplistic. Like I want to leave that specific content and feel better after having watched
Yeah.
it, versus worse, or feeling ashamed or feeling guilty, or like, yeah, that's just not helpful. So yeah, it almost feels simplistic. Like if I'm watching something, does this feel helpful or not helpful? If it's not helpful, then I'll mark like the not interested thing, or I'll quickly swipe away so that the algorithm doesn't think that I want to see more of that. But you're right, there is more valuable, I think, relatable content that is out there now.
Yeah, that feels true to the experience I've had on social media as well. I think there's been a really positive shift in like getting to a place where it's real honest conversations. I mean, that's a huge part of like why I'm doing this podcast, but I think it's also like a big part of your Instagram and what you do is like sharing that relatable stuff. So I'm happy to see that being the trend.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. And I think, there's something really interesting about just Instagram as a whole is that probably something that if we told our, millennial selves we're dealing with like dial up and AOL and chat rooms, like if they said like one day you can be on social media and make a living, like what? Like that just is so mind-boggling
Yeah.
to me. So I think there is something that allows people to connect with people and have careers and, be able to see experiences of people all around the world that we wouldn't have access to. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that's so incredible about our generation is that we're able to connect with so many people and see like relatable experiences that maybe we don't get to see in our everyday life.
Yeah.
So I think there's something that connects us all too, which is so great.
Yeah, that's a really positive thing for mothers who may feel like you're going through it completely alone when you're seeing like other people going through experiences that are similar. That like what a beneficial thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to acknowledge for anyone listening on or watching this on YouTube that Allie's screen is blacked out, and that's totally fine because we're still having the conversation. We're going to roll with it, but we'll just acknowledge it, you know?
It's always good to acknowledge
Right.
like
I'm like, I see it too, you guys.
yeah, I honestly it's so weird because I can see you just fine and I tried pressing the camera button and it's not
Oh well.
working. So,
It's, it's a podcast, so we're good.
yeah.
If there's like one thing, or maybe not just one thing, but something that you'd want to leave moms with to make sure that they're like just prioritizing mental health, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, of course I'm an advocate for therapy.
Me too.
Go to therapy. That's always a great place to start, but I understand that isn't always as accessible for everyone, or maybe you want to try something out first, or maybe you already are going to therapy and you want to do some other things, in addition to that. So I think, one of the first things is just making sure that your basic needs are met. So there's this acronym within the perinatal therapist space called NEST. So NESTS, and it helps us really assess like the basic core needs of moms, like when we're meeting with them to make sure, okay, are you hitting all these marks? If you're not, then that might be a really great place to start. So, first one is nutrition. And I'm not talking about like diet culture, weight loss, like don't go on a diet, like none of that. Like, are you eating nourishing foods that are leaving you feel satisfied? Are you taking care of your body? All of that. The E is exercise. So again, like body movement. Are you stretching? Are you walking? That sort of thing. S is sleep, the most important S ever. So at least 5 hours a night, making sure that you're getting sleep. I know in those early days it feels impossible. And that's why it's so important to have that support because that's where we see a lot of mental health issues is lack of sleep. And then T is time for self. So what is that as a mom? But even if you're having 5-10 minutes to yourself to like what we're doing here, listen to a podcast that feels like it supports your mental health, supports the motherhood experience, or maybe you listen to a true crime podcast, or, maybe you read a book, or maybe you play with your dog, or, whatever, like having time for yourself. And then S is support. So having support, from friends, from like-minded people, from family, all of that. So that I think is like a good thing to remember is the NEST acronym, just to really make sure you're hitting those points.
Yeah, I think that's a great, like, it just sets that foundation up. Then you can deal with like additional things. If you know that that foundation is good and you're still having issues, then there's I don't know. I think having that foundation and knowing the things that you need to have that foundation strong is so key for maintaining mental health, but also knowing when it's time to like deal with maybe larger issues at hand.
Yes, exactly.
So, my favorite way to wrap up these episodes is by asking guests about their own self care. Because, I mean, as we've kind of talked about, like caring for yourself, having that time for yourself is so important. And I think that can be really hard for moms to know how to care for themselves, like in actuality in day to day life. So, I'd love to just know how you take care of yourself and just if you have any advice for moms to make sure they are as well.
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I also love the idea of not seeing self care as this catch all solution, for mental health issues, especially in our society, with what moms are up against right now. But yeah, I love talking about like what I do for myself. I think that's great. And my self care now looks a lot different than it did when, say, I was less than a year postpartum. Self care for me at that point might have been just changing my clothes or taking a shower or walking to the mailbox or something like that. But now self-care is really great. Actually, I love to go on runs and walks. I was just a part of a adult women's rec basketball league, so I like to play basketball. I love to be with my dog, and I love to ride in the car with the windows down and blast my music. And, so some of these things are obviously very like intentional time, outside of the house things, but some of these things are also still within the home that I try to incorporate daily. And yeah, just find those little moments of like what makes me me. And what I will say, and this connects back to the millennial experience, is like a lot of what got me through some hard times when I was a kid, especially a teenager, is a lot of what's helping me now as a mom. So I'm just going to throw that out there that, if you're having trouble thinking about like, what do I even like to do? What would I even do for fun? Think back, okay, what did I do when I was a teenager? Was I making mixtapes in my room or CDs? Like, yeah. So thinking about that can be helpful too.
I love that. And what a like it's like some throwback self-care.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, yes.
I'm like, I feel like you need to do a series on that or something.
I do. I might take.
Some content ideas. I'm going to be looking out for that.
I'll tag you. Yes.
Good. Amazing. Allie, where can listeners find you? I really think they all should. I think you're a great follow. So let us know where.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm at Millennial Mom Therapist, all one word, on Instagram. And if that's, sometimes it comes up as different things because people sometimes forget how to spell millennial. So you can even just search my name, Allie McQuaid, Allie. But yeah, no, that's really all I'm at. I'm not on TikTok. I didn't dive down that road.
You're a millennial.
But yeah, I'm a millennial. I just watch TikToks on Instagram like everybody else. Yeah.
You love it.
So yeah, I'm on Instagram and I love it. And I love connecting with people on there. So
Yeah. That call out of millennial being hard to spell. There's 2 L's at the beginning and then 2 N's. It's those 2 N's for me.
That's where everyone gets
Yeah.
it.
I'll have it linked in the show notes so you don't even have to, don't even worry about it.
That's good. Yeah.
Make it easy. Allie, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here despite the chaos of the electricity situation going on where you're at.
Yeah. For rolling with it with me. I'm sad that we lost camera, but I'm glad that it was towards the end. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another episode focused around maternal mental health. With that, we'll say goodbye. You are worthy, Mama.